Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm James. Thank you for joining me. So today's video, I'm actually going to split into two parts. We'll be looking at the 3D modelling of something very similar to this little railway carriage. Now this has been produced as a 3D print in one piece. There's reasons why I do it in one piece and not separate pieces that glue together. We'll discuss that in the video. Now, I get asked all the time to produce a video about 3D CAD work, and it's a big subject and it's very difficult to distill down. So today's video really is looking at the concepts of creating something like this. I'll run through most of the 3D CAD work in real time so you can see exactly what I'm doing, but I'm not going to try and teach you how to do it. But hopefully if you watch these two videos, by the end of it, if it's something you're willing to learn, then you'll see conceptually what I'm trying to do. And I think with those concepts embedded, actually picking up and applying yourself and learning the skills involved should be that much easier. So then this is what we're going to have a go at creating. It's a 6-wheel Midland Railway carriage, quite straightforward, using a pretty basic drawing here. And we're going to begin by laying out the basic geometry in a 2D CAD program. Now the piece of software I'm going to use, I'll say this because I'm going to be asked, is called 2D Design. It's made by a company called TechSoft, and it's what we use in my job as a school teacher. Of all of the CAD software I've used, this is possibly the simplest and easiest and quickest way to lay down two-dimensional geometry. So I've got AutoCAD on my computer. I used to use it for work, but this is my go-to piece of software. But everything I do here could be done in FreeCAD, or I mean we could draw this directly in a 3D CAD package if we wished. For the 3D modelling, I'm going to use Solidworks simply because I have it. I enjoy using it. It's a great piece of software. But again, any of the steps that I'm showing could be done in Fusion 360, which is available freely for home use. FreeCAD is another one. Onshape. There's several, many in fact, 3D CAD drafting programs which are freely available. So you don't need to be using a sophisticated piece of software like SolidWorks to do something as basic as this. Anyway, that's enough wittering on. Let's get stuck in. So here goes. I hope you're all sitting comfortably. This then is the drawing that I've chosen to use. It's a third-class Midland Railway carriage, and the first thing I need to do is to get that scaled correctly. So here we've got a measurement on the drawing. It's 11 foot 9 inches. So what I'm going to do is, with my measuring tool within the software that I'm using, is just measure what that is in reality on my drawing as I've scaled it and brought it into the CAD software here. No idea what this is going to be. There we go, 72.54 millimeters. Now ideally you would choose the longest dimension that you've got on a drawing, but we'll come to that in a minute. I'm just using Google here to do a quick calculation for me to work out what that length should be in millimeters, because that's the units I prefer to work in, and I'm dividing that by 76.2 because I'm drawing this in 4mm scale. So with that done, I can select everything on my drawing. Sorry, no, I'm going to work out what that is. So it's 47mm is what I'm aiming for. I divide 72.54 by that, and that gives me 0.647 as a scale ratio. So I select everything, and I'm going to put that ratio in 0.674, whatever it was, into my, and scale my X and my Y axes. And you can see that measurement has now scaled down to 47mm. So I know that between those two axles at least that drawing is pretty accurate. Now I've got a long measurement there, 33 foot 6 inches. And so I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to draw a measurement on and see what that is in see if it checks out as being correct. Oh, second thoughts. Come to that in a minute. I'm drawing some basic geometry in here first. Forget what I've just said about that measurement. We'll come back to that in a minute. So I'm just drawing some lines to give me an overall length of my drawing. Now, there we go. There's my measurement, 134 millimeters. So what I've done here is I've divided that 134 millimeters by 5, and I'm using a tool on my piece of software here called Contour, sometimes on some software it's called Offset, just to divide that into 5 geometrically accurately. There are 5 compartments. I don't know from this drawing whether those compartments are all exactly the same size, so I'm making an assumption here. Now you'll see I've changed some line styles and also the colours of some lines. These are just really to help me sort of lay this out. And what I'm trying to do at this stage is trace this drawing, but in such a way that the geometry that I extract from it is pretty accurate. So really everything I'm doing here is creating construction lines. I'm creating lines around which I can mirror components. Now I'm using my dimension tool to kind of measure off the drawing here. This is an absolute no-no. I was taught not to do this, never scale from a drawing, which is why normally I would use a far more detailed set of works drawings. This really is a sort of at best the vaguest of general arrangements, but for the purposes of what we're doing here, I'm sure it'll be fine. So having set up the width of that window, I'm able again to use my contour or offset tool to replicate that. And what I'm trying to do is get 2 compartments worth here drawn up and have them geometrically kind of the same. So this is the tedious bit, but it will save us a lot of time in the long run when we come to do the 3D modelling if we've got this geometry as accurate as we can get it. Now if I were working with a proper works drawing with every item dimensioned, then of course I would just scale all of the dimensions from the printed numbers on the page. I wouldn't be tracing. In fact, this is very bad form, but it's okay. It's a toy train. It's it's not the end of the world. So throughout this process I'm using very basic tools. All of my lines are kind of orthogonal, I'm not sure what the word is. They're all running horizontally or vertically. I know that all my angles are 90 degrees. In fact, there's only one little curved line on here, which is this one at the bottom of the end of the coach there, the tumble home or turn under. Now we'll pop that in a minute. And to do that I'm using a tool called the Path tool. Now often you'll see my mouse disappear off to the right hand side of the screen, and that's turning on an attach tool. I'm toggling that on or off. And where I want 2 lines to meet together perfectly, we can select the attach tool and our new line that we draw will automatically tag itself onto one that's previously been drawn. That's a really useful thing to do, very important. Okay, so I've drawn that curve and now I'm just manipulating the curve with these two little handles. Now you'll see that the curved line that I'm drawing it's not perfect to the drawing that I'm tracing, and that's because this scanned drawing has got some distortion on it, and this is something you really need to be aware of if you're tracing a drawing. Over the years, the originals probably weren't printed that accurately in the first place, and certainly scaling them and scanning them and all sorts of losses over time mean that when you look at old drawings like this, very often they might have lost their proportions, they might be stretched in one axis more than the other, and you've got to use your best judgment in order to determine whether or not what you're tracing is actually right. Now, it may well be that what I'm doing here is completely wrong. As I say, I'm tracing a poorer quality drawing than I normally would, but you'll see throughout lots of my lines, if we look at these two horizontal lines here, they don't align with the beading they're supposed to be representing down below. Now that's because I think this drawing is actually slightly twisted. It needs to rotate by a fraction of a degree. I haven't done that because I originally took all of my sort of vertical dimensions from one of those dashed construction lines that you saw me draw. So it doesn't really matter if my background drawing is twisted. I've done my best to make sure that my geometry I've superimposed on it is correct. But I mention it because somebody will no doubt say you haven't traced or followed the lines that accurately. For example, if we look at this end view of the carriage, I can see just by looking at the drawing that it is slightly leaning to the right. So the lines I'm dropping on I know are vertical. I don't really care how twisted the background image is. Now we'll be finished with this soon, and we'll be able to whiz on to the exciting part, which is the 3D modelling. But time spent doing this is worth its weight in gold. I often will spend as long creating the two-dimensional layout as I will the 3D model, and this is one of the reasons why I prefer to work in 2D CAD on a more traditional drawing board, shall we say. I can capture all the detail, and usually when I do this I would be drawing on different layers as well, so I could switch certain layers on or off. I might, for example, focus on the detail in a door, and that might all be on a single layer. Maybe the collection mouldings around the windows might normally be on a separate layer. But for now I'm sort of, believe it or not, whizzing through this as quickly as I can. But I am doing it in real time, so it gives you an idea of sort of how long this takes. Now I think this video is going to end up being about an hour long, and I think about an hour is realistic for the end product that we're going to end up with. I think, well, this is just one of a collection of several coaches of this type that I've drawn, and this one will end up being drawn to a slightly lower standard. Some of those other coaches have ended up taking me 5 or 6 hours each by the time I've fiddled with all sorts of detail on them. But about an hour to get you something reasonably basic. And of course, once you've got the basic thing, it's a bit more exciting. You don't mind spending the other hours once you've already got something that's more or less complete. So what I'm doing here now is just laying out the end of the clear story roof. I really don't like this style of railway carriage, which is another reason why this is going to be a more basic version. The others I've made are more sort of the earlier arc-roofed Clayton coaches. I really went to town with those, so this one I'm cutting corners a bit because I don't really like the look of them, if I'm honest. Okay, so we're going to have a look at this curve here. this is one of those things that this drawing is definitely distorted. It's going to be very difficult to reproduce this accurately. Probably when I get this into Solidworks I will tweak it some more. Solidworks will deal with splines and irregular curves a bit more easily, but this at least will be a good start. So I've drawn a basic line in there. I can now edit that line. You can see those two little yellow handles that have appeared. And I can drag those until this line more or less fits well. Now, as I say, there's quite a lot of distortion on the original drawing. The sort of the vertical start and end point of my line that I'm drawing here matches perfectly with that side view that I've drawn, which is kind of off the left of my screen. So I'm more interested at this stage in that curve matches what I've previously drawn on the side view. If I just copied the end view and the side view as they appear on the paper, then the chances are when I get that into 3D CAD they won't match, and I'll have a dickens of a job messing around with them later on. Anyway, I think we've seen enough of this now. Let me whiz through this part of the process a little bit and get us on to something a little bit more exciting. Okay, so at this point we've got the basic geometry produced. It's not necessary to draw the entire coach. I've just drawn half of one end and a kind of the side view of an end compartment and one of the sort of internal ones. I've copied and pasted that into a new sheet, and what I'm going to do is export this. I'm going to export it as a .dxf file, that being the kind of the drawing standard that CAD packages use to exchange data from one to t'other. So we'll just create a little folder for this. My typing isn't the fastest. Okay, with that done, we can now begin the exciting bit. So we've come into Solidworks. What I'm going to do is open that .dxf file. It doesn't matter whether we're using Solidworks or Fusion or any of the others. It's going to ask us, do we want to bring that in as a sketch? And yes, I do. And I've got to choose my units, which in this case will be millimeters. So with that done, that geometry that I previously created is going to pop up on the screen here. Now, I could have created all of that in Solidworks. I could have done exactly the same process, but I'll just do it the way I like to do it. I don't think it takes me any longer, and certainly I then have the two-dimensional data, which is much easier to extract retrospectively. If I wanted to take, let's say I've drawn this thing in 3D, but I've decided I want to laser cut some of the panels, I've then got to go in and export the two-dimensional sketches out of the 3D drawing, whereas I like to have all of that 2D data all ready to go. Okay, so I'm starting on the end here, and you'll see I'm actually deleting some of these lines that I previously created. Now there's a good reason for it, and we'll come on to that in just a minute. Right then, so I'll finish up deleting the last of those lines. We'll draw a new centre line in. There we go, and that shape has now been coloured a bluey grey colour. I know that that is a solid profile that we could extrude and give this some length. Now I mentioned previously that the splines in my 2D CAD software, they're fine, but when they bring into Solidworks it brings them in as a series of short, straight, sort of like a faceted curve. And that's fine. Geometrically they're okay. The thing would print all right, but when I make this 3D, it will look like it's got these sort of threepenny bit facets on. So I always redraw my splines in Solidworks. I would do the same if I'm working in Fusion too, although I prefer using Solidworks. Perhaps we ought to do this in Fusion at some point. So here we go, we create a spline and then it gives us these little arrows which we can drag from side to side and extend in and out, and that enables us to create the profile that we're after. And there we go, we sort of dial that in. So with that done, I'm now selecting those short faceted lines of the original splines and just deleting those. Now this curved side of the roof here, I'm not too happy with it, but we'll create a new spline anyway. If I remember correctly, I think I copied what was there and I later come back to this and make it look a little bit more accurate. Again, if I was working with works drawings, of course there might be dozens of drawings for different elements of something like a carriage and definitely a locomotive, and ideally you'd have access to all of those. What we're doing here is a bit of a cheat. I'm using a basic drawing, but you know, whatever, it's a toy train. It's probably close enough. Okay, so that'll do for now. What we can do is now extrude that and give it some length. And in this case, I'd measured the previously, it's 134 millimeters. So there we go, we type that in and we've got ourselves half a coach body. Except we haven't got that turn under or tumble home on the ends. So I'm going to come back to this previous drawing I did. And the first thing I'll seek to do here is to tidy up that outer spline. So I'm going to do this exactly the same way as you've just seen me do. Create a spline and then manipulate it until it's kind of where I want it to be. We'll then delete the individual lines. Although here I've accidentally deleted the one above, so let's undo that, come back in here and we'll get rid of these lines. Now what I want at this point, when I'm going to paste this new spline onto the side view of that coach body we've just created, and I need a way of geometrically aligning it with what I've drawn previously. So I'm going to add a couple of lines here. I'm going to stick a vertical in and a horizontal, effectively to make a sort of a triangle, if you like, and that little triangular piece we're going to slice away from the ends of that coach body that we just created. So I'm doing my final tweaks and bits and pieces here. I've copied that. We'll come into here, we'll select that side face. We're going to create a new sketch, and then I'm just going to Control V and paste my little triangular piece that I'd created, and we'll drag that over and we'll stick it on the corner there, and you can hopefully see how that's the bit that we're going to extrude, do an extruded cut. We're going to slice off, but of course first it's necessary to get it properly aligned. There we go. Now I'm going to choose a centerline tool and draw a centre line down the side of this carriage body. And if I select that little triangular piece, we can mirror it and mirror it about that centre line, so we've got that repeated on the other end of the coach. So now it's a straightforward job to do an extruded cut and remove that from the body of the coach. So at this point we've got half the carriage body drawn, and I think we'll pop a pin in it for this episode. What I'll do next time is we'll come back, we will add the detail onto that carriage, but we're only going to detail the 2 compartments that I drew previously. Then we'll slice this sausage of a carriage up to create a kind of an internal compartment and an end compartment. We'll create those as separate files and shuffle them about, stick them back together, and before you know it, we'll have a whole coach. So from here on in it gets much quicker. Now, I dare say many people have skipped past this video. I don't blame them. If you're interested in this sort of thing and some questions have arisen from what you've just seen, email me or leave a message in the comments, and I'll try and deal with them all when we get to part 2. So part 2 is all filmed. I'm just going to edit that. I'll leave this one up for a week, I think, before I pop the next one in readiness for any questions. But just to recap, and in preparation for part 2, 3D CAD modelling is simply about creating a 2-dimensional profile. We can then extrude that profile to give it some form. We could then select one of the faces on that 3-dimensional shape, create a new sketch, draw a new profile, and extrude or cut away, and that's basically what the whole process involves. And when you do that enough times, you can create pretty much any shape you like. So with that said, we'll stop here, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for watching. Cheerio.